If you were just going on like what South African artist right now had the credibility and the clout in order to represent their country on the world stage, it's just worth saying. Gabriel Goliath probably is that person. I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. Here we are, already at the end of the first month of the new year. That means it's time to do the first Art Angle roundup of 2026. As is custom, we'll review some of the art news stories that people are talking about and that might tell us something about the forces shaping the year to come. So today we're going to be talking about three stories. We're going to be talking about the big controversy over the South Africa pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which we've had multiple stories on ArtNet News about it. We're going to be talking about the Prado Museum in Madrid, which has a good problem, which is that they have too many visitors and a new plan to deal with that. And then we're going to talk about the mini genre of speed painting, and specifically the painter Vanessa Orabuena, who is Donald Trump's favorite painter and sold a painting of Jesus that she made in 10 minutes at Mar-a-Lago in a fundraiser on December 31st for almost $3 million. So it's a sign of the world out of control, maybe slightly more fun one to talk about than some of the other things that are in the news, or maybe not. We'll talk about it. With me to figure all this out is Kate Brown, ArtNet's senior editor in Berlin, and my Art Angle co-host. Kate, how are you?
Hi, Ben. I think we can still say Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Yes, I think we're safe until just after this recording. And also talking with us today is Naomi Rea, ArtNet's editor-in-chief in London. How are you, Naomi?
Hello. I'm very excited to be on the first roundup of the year. What an honor.
Yeah, well, no one better to start the year with. I'm still shaking off the cobwebs. And so before we get going, let's talk about a little bit of art. And actually, since it's the beginning of the year, we thought we would talk about what we were excited about that was upcoming instead of things we had seen. So, Naomi, is there anything in London you're excited about?
Yes. What a question.
There is.
I'm looking forward to the big Tracey Emin retrospective, which is opening at Tate Modern in February. I'm a big Tracey Emin fan. Although we see her work kind of all the time at art fairs, she's not really received this kind of big institutional recognition. It's a 40-year retrospective of her career, and I'm really excited to see it. I've seen her exhibited in London. She did have some major shows in 2021, I think. She had a big show at the Royal Academy where her paintings were shown next to Munch. And I've seen in Margate a few years before that, her My Bed installation was shown next to Turner's paintings. But I'm really excited to just see, Tracey on her own and what they do with her.
I'm sure that drove some of those British conservative art critics up the wall, seeing Tracey Emin's My Bed next to Turner. I feel like you say she hasn't gotten a lot of respect. I feel like maybe of all the young British era artists from the 90s, she's maybe the one who seems to have the most respect. Do you agree with that?
I think she's got the most market, maybe not the most market. Damien Hirst obviously got the biggest kind of market success out of it. But I do think that institutionally, she has been a little overlooked. She's started to get more. She had a big show at the Yale Center for British Art in the US, but I really do think in the UK she hasn't been looked at properly. And I think a lot of people don't even really understand her as an artist because of all of the fame around the young British artists, and kind of think of her primarily as a conceptual artist versus painter. I think she started as a painter and, very much in her late career has really leaned into that as her identity as an artist. And I think seeing how Tate put together, those kind of hits from her career and sort of contextualize her properly as an artist, I think it will be a big job, but I'm looking forward to it. And I think just in general, Tracey Emin's work is so emotional and vulnerable. I'm looking forward to just experiencing the show. What are you looking forward to, Ben?
It's hard for me to narrow down what I'm looking forward to. I would say it's going to be a big March. March is the opening of the new museum, or the expanded new museum, and they're kicking the doors open with a show called New Humans, Memories of the Future, which is about artists looking at how technology has changed the definition of the human, which is not just very now, but very me, like right up my alley in terms of what I'm interested in. And then just a week after that, the Met Museum is opening something completely different, which is Raphael, Sublime Poetry, dedicated to the Renaissance artist. And I can't imagine that's not going to be a huge, huge blockbuster. I think they got like 200 paintings by Raphael. You know, he's one of the Ninja Turtles, one of the name brand Renaissance artists. You laugh, but, you know, I often wonder what would have happened if they had named the fourth Ninja Turtle Botticelli instead of Donatello, or Uccello instead of, I bet it would change which artist people could name. I really do. In any case, Raphael's a big one. I don't even know if I love Raphael. I mean, I assume I will, but he's Mr. Sophistication, and I'm going to be very interested to see how it reads to me in these times. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And what about you, Kate?
Yeah, well, we'd be remiss if we don't name check the Venice Biennial, which is opening in the spring. So I'm looking forward to that. But within the week of the Venice Biennial, there are a ton of other shows that open satellite spaces, if you could even call the Prado Foundation.
In Venice?
In Venice, a satellite foundation, very central to the week's events. And they open a show later in the week on preview week. And it's always a big show, and it's always a big story and a big blockbuster. And this year, I think it's going to be really good. It's two artists who I think are just fantastic coming together sort of for the first time publicly, it seems. Arthur Jafa and Richard Prince, who, for those who don't know, both use appropriated imagery and video, but a very different subject matter. Jafa looks at Black visual culture, and Prince looks more at mass media, the American psyche, and white masculinity. And apparently they've been in conversation for a long time, but this will be, you know, a big
Who knew?
Coming out for them as, creative partners to a certain extent. And I think it's going to be really cool. It's also going to be curated by Nancy Spector, who's a fantastic curator who's known for putting together really amazing shows, such as Felix Gonzalez Torres's major show at the Guggenheim, which everyone, still talks about as such an important exhibition.
Well, since the Venice Biennale has already come up, why don't we take that cue to talk about our first story, which is this rolling controversy of many parts around the South Africa Pavilion. Naomi, you were going to introduce that one.
Yes, sure. So as Kate mentioned, we are 5 months out from the opening of the Venice Biennale, and South Africa's culture minister has abruptly cancelled the project that was slated to show in its national pavilion, calling the project highly divisive, and he even went as far as to suggest a foreign influence campaign was behind the work. So the artwork was by artist Gabrielle Goliath, and it's called Elegy. It's a new iteration of a decade-long performance piece that pays tribute to individuals whose lives have been claimed by either gendered or racialized or sexualized violence. In the work, singers take turns to step onto a pedestal, and they hold a note for as long as possible. And it's kind of a devastating lament. I first saw the work actually in Joburg, a different iteration of the work in 2019, and it was commemorating femicide in South Africa and women who had experienced sexual violence. And it was just completely, it's very, very heavy, very, very emotive. Actually, on this podcast last year, you did the episode about aesthetic chills. That's certainly one of these works that gives you that kind of spine tingling
Yeah, I
feeling.
remember you talking to me about that show when you'd seen it and how powerful it was.
Yeah, it really, truly, I mean, I was emotionally struck by it. I think that heavy sort of content mixed with the, music's ability to kind of evoke emotion, I think made it very, very powerful. But anyway, in Venice, the work, which was going to be a multi-channel video installation, I believe, it was going to pay tribute to 4 different people. One of them was a South African teenager who was murdered in 2014. And then 2 Namibian women who were killed by German colonial forces in the early 20th century. And then finally, a Palestinian poet who was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. And it was that last tribute that I think caused the culture minister to kind of take umbrage at the work and cancel it, calling it divisive. And the culture minister is now seeking to replace Gabrielle Goliath's work with artists who he says will promote South Africa. So the art world in South Africa is understandably in uproar. Goliath, I think she was selected by an independent committee.
Unanimously, I believe, yeah.
Yes, and she's calling it censorship, and the selection committee is calling it abuse of power. A formal complaint has been lodged with South Africa's public protector, which is the state official responsible for investigating abuses of power. And meanwhile, the artist and the pavilion's curator, Ingrid Masondo, are taking legal action in an effort to overturn the decision, leaning on South Africa's laws protecting freedom of expression. They've asked the court to take a ruling before February so that they would have time to prepare for the pavilion. What do you think?
Well, I think that the whole thing is just such a mess because also the cultural minister should not be bringing his own personal politics into a decision, regardless of the content at all. Like, that's just unprofessional. So but I will say like one should see what the court ruling turns out. Well, I think above anything that there's going to be a real risk that South Africa doesn't end up showing anything in Venice because the Venice Biennial is actually 100 days away right now. So I think that this delay really jeopardizes like a major country's possibility of showing at the Venice Biennial. And it's also, art scenes are small. So in the case that this ruling doesn't work out for Gabrielle Goliath, it would be hard to imagine who would like step over that project and take it over. I mean, it seems to me that from what I've read of the coverage, that there's his personal politics, which deviate from South Africa's wider political position on the Israel and Palestine war, seem to have gotten into the fray.
I was pretty shocked when this unfolded, simply for that reason, that South Africa has taken a very public stand. I mean, it sort of led the world, actually, in accusing Israel of genocide, like charging with genocide in the International Court of Justice, I believe, very early on after October 7th. And I know that South Africa has a very long-standing stance on this. It's a very big part of South African politics because Israel did supply arms to the apartheid government and because of the resonances between the situation of the Palestinians and South African apartheid. I mean, it is a very resident issue in South Africa. So my first reaction was like, this seems totally unhinged, or just a surprise. And then when you look into it, and there's always a danger in commenting on the politics in another country that I frankly know very little about. But Gayton McKenzie, the culture minister, is member and founder of the Patriotic Alliance, which is a very small political party in the coalition with the ANC right now. And he, I think, very early on expressed public support for Israel. He was very much a stand with Israel politician within the South African scene. And so it really does seem to be like that his personal politics are manifesting here. And also there's some weird stuff. He also mentioned that we can't be talking about Israel committing genocide when we're being accused of genocide because of this whole stuff about the Trump administration talking about white genocide. That's become a whole right-wing meme, a white genocide in South Africa, like in a totally strange thing. The United States is completely horrifyingly attacking Latin American refugees and at the same time welcoming white South African refugees to the United States. So it's just a mess. It's a really strange situation.
I mean, it's a politician's move, a bad move, in my opinion. But he's obviously heard that the subject matter will touch on what is a polarizing issue. I think the Israel-Gaza war, people's stances on it have been polarized. But I do think, if you actually looked at the content of the work or what the work is about, you're talking about commemorating an individual and a civilian whose life has been lost in war, which I don't think that is part of what is divisive. I think civilians are not supposed to be victims here in warfare. And that is something that I think the fact that that is being taken as the political stance, I think, is a little bit telling of his personal political beliefs.
I mean, I think that, as Ben said, it's very hard from all the allegations being thrown around to see what exactly has gone on. And I think it really shows also the lack of transparency in some of these processes around pavilion announcements too. We should mention also that what he later brought into the fray was that Qatar Museums had approached the South African Commissioner, which is this nonprofit body that was assembled this year to kind of do fundraising for this pavilion, and that they had approached them with an interest in acquiring the work. And so I think there is this aspect of his politics that is being considered in the media. And then there's also this question of is it strange that effectively a government funded institution of another country is suggesting that they're interested in buying a work in a way to fundraise. But again, these are just things that are at this point being stated in articles with, unclear tales of evidence.
Really hard to tell looking in from outside. I mean, the artist and the organizer of the pavilion say that he's apparently referring to an inquiry that the Qatar Museums made that didn't go through or didn't go anywhere. And he brought that up a full month after he said that he was rejecting the pavilion or overriding the decision of the committee because he thought it was too controversial. So from the outside, it really does look like, trying to find an excuse in order to shut this down. The artist is suing, I believe, in order to get the go-ahead. I do think it's a political statement, Naomi. I guess I sort of disagree with you in the sense that, although it is a memorial to an individual person, I think it's fair to say, and almost would be disingenuous to say that it's not a political statement. I mean, for the very reason that it's South Africa Pavilion, South Africa publicly has a stand on the situation in Gaza, which is ongoing and still horrifying despite the nominal ceasefire. But if you were just going on what South African artist right now had the credibility and the clout in order to represent their country on the world stage, it's just worth saying. Gabrielle Goliath probably is that person. She was in the last Venice Biennale, in the main show. And a version of this work, Elegy, was actually performed as part of the main show during that time. And actually, a version of it was performed previously in 2019, I believe. So she's been in the mix with this work, and it seems like he's saying he wants a show that presents a world-class image of South Africa. She has been doing that with this very work previously, leading up to this. And also, I just did want to say that if you happen to be in New York and you're interested in this story, Goliath does have a show on at PS1 right now of her video work.
Well, I just want to interject for 1 second, because I think maybe I wasn't clear. I wasn't trying to say that I don't think the work is political. I was merely making the point that to suggest that we shouldn't mourn the loss of a civilian life, I disagree with that. I think that it is a tragedy, every civilian whose life is lost in war.
And you don't have to agree with an artist's politics to defend their ability to express themselves. And I think that's really at the core here, is that his politics should not be able to come into the fray and make a call about her politics, right?
Right. I'm actually curious to see how the legal action turns out and whether actually, because in the end of the day, if the culture ministry, I think that they're trying to fight that they can't overturn the selection committee, but I think if the culture ministry owns the pavilion and the ultimate decision, I don't know if that's going to work. Maybe if they're also going in on a sort of freedom of expression case, that they might get something, but I'm not sure. An interesting example of how different countries kind of choose to deal with who represents them in Venice. So I think the UK does something similar. It sort of appoints an arm's length body to take an independent process, but it's just interesting to see what happens when it is a challenging work. And I think art is often challenging. And people pretend that the Venice Biennale is not really about politics and sort of presenting your country on the world stage.
Yeah, I think presenting your country on the world stage in an apolitical way is probably harder than it's been in our lifetimes at this point. And it's going to be a real serious theme of our coverage, no doubt, which is how the now accelerating breakdown of the world order manifests at, what is modeled after a World's Fair and considered the Olympics of art. And all those artists, bear the weight of that moment. It'll be very, very interesting to see how all this plays out. That might be understating it, actually. Should we move on to the second item, which is lighter? I mean, it has to do with the ongoing theme of museums in crisis, I guess, but in maybe a different way than we've talked about on this show before. Kate, what can you tell us about what's going on at the Prado Museum?
Yeah, and I think it's, you bring up our museums in crisis focus from the end of last year, and I think this is really a story showing that museums are in all kinds of different crises, and some are from too much tourism and too much attention. And I think that the Prado Museum is definitely one of those, while other museums are struggling to get people in the door. So the Prado Museum has basically stated we do not want a single visitor more. Their visitor numbers for last year have come in, and they had 3.5 million visitors, which was a record high. And for those who don't know, this is a museum in Madrid that is, has the Garden of Earthly Delights by Bosch and Goya's The Third of May and Velázquez's Las Meninas. It is full of major hits from art history and absolutely crammed full of people. So they are trying to find a way to mitigate this. And I think what's quite interesting is within the statistics that they shared, 65% of the visitors are overseas tourists. So part of their mitigation efforts are going to involve also trying to figure out how to get a better balance with Spanish and also municipal visitors. It's not the only museum that has complained of this. The Louvre in Paris has had major issues with overcrowding, and part of their refurbishment plans were to make a separate area for the Mona Lisa so that other parts of that area of the museum could breathe. I mean, there's a bunch of other art in that room, you might be surprised to learn. And there's also the Uffizi in Florence that has had the same issues and dealt with that in interesting ways, which maybe we can talk about. But also in your cities that you live in, right? Like the Met and the British Museum, these are museums that are just full. Yeah. Do you go to them because of that or avoid them?
Well, no, I go to the British Museum. I go to the museums. Any of the blockbuster exhibitions, my viewing experience, I just prefer to go during a press view because you're going to get more time with the art and you're not going to be jostled by people taking photos. I mean, the rest of the British Museum, usually there's enough space to move around. I'm all for trying to improve the visitor experience when it comes to seeing an exhibition. I think limiting visitor numbers is one way to do that. I think the Prado also tried to ban photos in service of the same aim.
Man, back when I lived in Spain, I went to the Prado pretty often just to commune with the art. And I just remember one time, like just sitting there, I don't remember what I was looking at, but an American tourist coming in, filming, and just literally filming every object in the room and not looking up from the camera a single time, just sort of walking around like an image collecting zombie. I'm glad you brought up the example of the Mona Lisa room, the Louvre hiving off the Mona Lisa into a separate thing, because that was my first thought when I was thinking about this story, which is that I think museum attendance really follows tourism flows. Like, tourists just tend to go to museums in cities with big tourist flows already, no matter what. They'll go to the attractions there because you kind of need a reason to have justified your trip. And I really do wonder if everything wouldn't be better if you just took the superstar works and gave them separate museums themselves. I think that would give the people who are going to go to the museum, no matter what, more of a chance to find unknown stuff, and it would give the people who are just there for Las Meninas or the Garden of Earthly Delights or Goya's black paintings. The Prado has Saturn devouring his children, probably one of the most horrifying paintings ever painted, one of the most indelible. So if you just gave them their own space, you would have more room to enjoy all of those things with maybe spaces that were set up for the crowds that they draw, and you would also give the other art the breathing room, and they wouldn't have the competition with these things that have so much media attention around them baked in. Maybe you'd have a chance to grow new hits.
I think that's an interesting point, and it's very much in line with what Eike Schmidt was trying to do with the Uffizi galleries, because a few years ago, there was a similar kind of media moment where they were really suffering from overcrowding in the Florence Museum. And what they did was they did the Uffizi diffusi, the diffused Uffizi, and they took some of its famous works and they peppered them around towns in Tuscany to sort of diffuse out. I know. It sounds like a dish. I hate to say it. To diffuse the tourism into smaller economies that are outside of Florence. I can say for Berlin, there's a bunch of fantastic smaller museums that don't get the same amount of attention as the big ones. So yeah, you could diffuse it within the gallery spaces, like you say, but also into across Madrid maybe. But again, logistical nightmare, surely.
I guess the one thing, or two things actually, that this story makes me think about. The first is kind of the obvious one. If you do limit entry, presumably you're going to have to lean on other sources of revenue. The Spanish government, I think, funds the Prado and must have signed off on this idea to cap visitor numbers with some sort of commitment to supporting the Prado. As we know, all sorts of expenses have risen and just keep rising for keeping a museum going, as you talked about actually on this podcast last year. And then the other question is really the mission of a museum. If a mission of a museum is to actually get the art in front of as many people as possible, what does a decision like this do to that? And I think it requires some thought, like if you're going to limit the number of people you're allowing in to see artworks, then thinking about how to get those artworks in front of people in other ways. For example, investing in social media, storytelling around the work outside of the museum.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what you said about the smaller museums, Kate, because museum attendance is really asymmetrical. Like there's a handful of superstar museums, and then there's like everybody else. And that kind of tracks to the problem of over-tourism versus under-tourism. Actually, it's exactly tracks to that. And it corresponds to the idea of these superstar works of art, which are all great works of art, but they're just a handful of them. And I think that's partly because there are great works of art that have accumulated a fandom over time and lots of scholarship, and people have seen them in posters and riffed on and so on. But it's also kind of a circular thing. I think that I would hope that art history can produce new interest over time, that there can be new hits made. I think Hilma af Klint is a good example of an artist who has been around for a long time as a peripheral figure in art history, and then got a new attention on her and now is a big star. So I just really feel like if you're talking about what you're talking about, Naomi, which is like, how do you better do the education, the public mission of the museum, I do think it kind of helps to separate out, that they're really different visitors. They're visitors who are there to see the hits, and they're visitors who are there to kind of dig into the art history. And those might be just totally different audiences at this point. And yeah, in terms of the funding, I think with separate institutions, you'd have separate revenue streams, I guess, if you want to think about it like that.
Yeah, you could probably charge more for the Mona Lisa ticket.
I'm sure they will.
Almost certainly. I mean, practically, I think what it means, it's just got to be time ticketing or something like that. And I believe that the director of the Prado said that they wanted to focus specifically on
local audiences.
Well, yeah, local audiences. Like they feel like that things are out of balance. I mean, Spain does depend very heavily on tourism. It's a tourist economy like so many European capitals, but I think there is a sense that they would like to not have their museums be just for that guy with the camera that I saw so many years ago.
Well, speaking of taking pictures and highly viral moments, we should talk about speed painting, which is the greatest art there ever was, according to some politicians in power.
Well, if you're just going to judge it by price, speed painting is having a moment. We're talking about this because on New Year's, there was a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago where Trump introduced a painter named Vanessa Orabuena, who painted an image of Jesus's face. You can watch the footage online. She sort of paints a cross on the canvas, and then the cross is built out to be his nose and eye line, and sort of in 10 minutes conjures an image of Christ. Well, there's bombastic music playing, and she's sort of pauses from painting the canvas to sort of throw her arms open like she's worshiping. The painting was sold for $2.7 million or something, like a huge amount of money, to an anonymous couple. And it's just kicked the profile of this painter up a notch. She's maybe Donald Trump's favorite painter. She already has at least one work that I know of in the White House that she painted, which is a painting of him striding towards the viewer, surrounded by American flags against a very disturbing looking orange sky. You can find her on ArtNet News last year when there was this very bad painting, a painting that Donald Trump didn't like of himself at the Colorado Capitol. And he had her come in and do a new painting that he preferred to replace it. She really is a big figure in his orbit, but is most known for what she calls worship painting, where she on stage is painting live and usually constructing an image while surrounded by music and so on. It's a very mega church vibe. And a lot of people are talking about speed painting now on a minute by minute basis. That's a lot of money per minute. Maybe the most most valuable time per art made that I can think of. So what do you guys think?
Well, I mean, it makes sense that a painting that you can make under 10 minutes would be appealing to people generally right now, given like virality and social media feeds for sure. It fits so well in the real form. Yeah, and it was Trump who'd said, I think that she's one of the greatest artists anywhere in the world right now. So that is his opinion on record. Yeah, I think that the whole thing about her painting as like live worship is quite interesting because it's a very like pre-Enlightenment idea of like the artist having the hand of God pass through them to like make it work. Like this was sort of in the classical times what people used to think happened when people make art. And obviously some people still believe it. And I mean, no disrespect there at all, but it's, referencing surely that. And then I also think it's quite interesting, this kind of motif of Jesus sort of appearing within 10 minutes, because of course there's, in the Christian religion, the sort of Shroud of Turin, like that Jesus's face appears on fabric. And so it's not really a far stretch to see this happen on canvas, right?
Oh yeah, this was a painting inspired by the Shroud of Turin. I should say that.
Okay, well, there we go.
Yeah. So good connection, Kate. Well done. Naomi, did you know about speed painting? Was this on your radar?
Oh, yeah. I mean, speed painting, for whatever reason, has infiltrated my algorithm, and it's only gotten worse since we started talking about this. But I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that Donald Trump likes it so much, because he's always been, ratings guy and social media virality. And obviously, there's something about speed painting that is conducive to video format, as Kate mentioned, and it does really well. There's a whole genre, all sorts of speed painters, and there's kind of different kind of communities of them. There's this kind of like battle rap adjacent community of speed painters who battle each other on stage. And then there's also this kind of like pageants, like beauty pageants, talent competition as well. And I was trying to figure out, like, what is it about it that is so successful? And it seems to be like doing anything and then doing it in a short amount of time is obviously some sort of like superlative form of the thing. So painting's impressive, but I can paint this in 90 seconds, and that's even more impressive. There's just something, it doesn't actually really matter how good it is. It's like the speed. And then I think the second element is like it being a recognizable figure. So as you're watching it, you figure out what's happening and then you watch it happen, which is kind of satisfying. Yeah. So you start to see, Marilyn Monroe or Bob Marley or Jesus Christ.
It's so schmaltzy. Just to say, I agree with all that. I find it sort of fascinating as a genre because it's at once this kind of conservative realist aesthetic. It's like, yeah, a painting of a bald eagle. That's real art. And at the same time, it's so postmodern, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's just all spectacle. I mean, it's like she's dressed in a cocktail dress and this bombastic music, just a total made for social media, what you called in an article realism, REELISM, Kate, made for social media. It's an interesting hybrid, natural hybrid of all that stuff. And then I think there's also something in here. This is a big genre in the MAGA world. In a way, it's what they should have sent to the Venice Biennale. There's another painter named Scott Lobido, who's from Staten Island, who did a live speed painting when Trump, during the last election, did his Madison Square Garden rally. I mean, it is a populist aesthetic in a lot of ways. And I think there's something about the idea of something that looks like a painting, the kind of thing that's celebrated in a museum as very important, being done very fast, that appeals to people. In The Art of the Deal, there's a section where Donald Trump talks about a day in his life, and one incident is he goes to an abstract painter's studio, and the painter says to him, I can't meet, give me a second. And then in his telling, or the telling of his ghostwriter, pours a bunch of paint randomly on the canvas and says, like, I just made $100,000, Donald. And Donald's like, well, now that's great art. So I think there's something about just making money out of nothing that's also part of this aesthetic.
Yeah, especially though, I agree with you, but I do think that the Christian speed painting is particularly MAGA. David Garibaldi, another of these probably 12 speed painters in America, he performed live for an Obama fundraiser in 2008. And of course, there is, graffiti art being a very apolitical kind of anti-establishment, no matter what your political spectrum is, of just painting something really quickly. But I just want to shout out my favorite of all of these people is Nico Nicolaitis, who's a shamanic performance artist of this genre.
Oh, I don't know this one.
I sent it to you over Instagram, and he punches the canvas. He pummels it. He tenderizes it. It's really something. So he paints it, but then he also beats it up. It's crazy.
I remember the exact first time I saw this genre, which was an artist named Michael Israel back in 10 years ago or something like this, who is a ripped guy with long hair, sometimes performs shirtless. And I went back to just now to look at that trailer that at first grabbed my attention, because I had all these same thoughts. This is so schmaltzy. This is so showbiz, but also kind of this conservative aesthetic. What's going on? And I was not delighted, but I got a shiver of recognition to say that the trailer shows him performing and, surrounded by dancing, sexy dancers and music. And then it says, he's worked with celebrities like Warren Buffett. And then Donald Trump is the very second person that it mentioned. That was 10 years ago, 2015, before Trump's rise to the permanent, unfortunately, center of political conversation. So long time interest in this kind of art spectacle.
Yeah, I think that what you said about it being very mega church vibes made me think about that must really be what it feels like to be at a Donald Trump rally, like a mega church, and this kind of circus feeling.
Yeah, I do think the Christian component, it does, I don't know. Europeans tell me it feels like a really American Christian component. I mean, Vanessa Orabuena first went viral for this performance she did at the Liberty Ball for Donald Trump, where she was performing and painting an image of him, and there was this bombastic Christian music singing, and the camera cuts to people with tears in their eyes, and that went viral from I think a Reddit post where it was European Christians looking in and saying what is this, Americans? This looks like total idolatry. How is this not idolatry? So I just want to say, it's not an anti-Christian thing. I just think there's a very particular kind of thing happening in a certain corner of U.S. evangelical world, aesthetically, politically, all that stuff.
It's so Trump to have the worship painter paint him.
Well, on that note, I think we should wrap it up. Naomi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And Kate, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Ben. Thanks.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you've heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It helps other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili, with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Caroline Goldstein, and Naomi Rea. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.